What's up, guys? Welcome back to the show. I have a super exciting guest interview for you today. I'm going to be interviewing Randy DeSoto, who is an award-winning filmmaker. He's a writer at the Western Journal. He got to interview people like Charlie Kirk and Franklin Graham. And he also is the author of a book called We Hold These Truths, which is an amazing book. I'm in the middle of reading it right now. I absolutely love it. And I'm super, super excited to get to interview this guy. But I wanted to ask you real quick before we get to the episode, if you would please consider subscribing, liking, commenting, turning on notifications. It helps even more people see this video along with all of my other videos. So please consider subscribing, liking, and commenting. Also, if you haven't already, you can subscribe to my blog at carsonwagner.substack.com. Again, that is carsonwagner.substack.com. Let's get to the interview. Randy, welcome to the show. Super good to have you here.
Thank you, Carson. Good to be here.
Yeah. So tell me about yourself and how you got into politics, how you ended up here.
I went to West Point back in the 80s and Reagan was president. And actually, I should even go back. When I was in middle school, we had an all-school assembly. This was 1980, and Reagan was running for the first time. Well, on the national ticket. He'd run in 76, but didn't win the Republican nomination. But then in 80, he ran. And so we had an all-school assembly election. And for some reason, I was already very interested in politics and interested in Reagan. And so I represented Reagan at this all-school assembly. So there was John Anderson, who was running as an independent, and Jimmy Carter, the incumbent, and then Reagan. And so the most popular girl in school was speaking on behalf of Jimmy Carter. So she got up there and she put a placard in front of the podium in our auditorium. And she started speaking and saying how great Carter was and whatever. And I should say Carter had won in our previous all-school election in 76 when I was in elementary school. And so anyway, so here we are. I'm in middle school. And so she goes and speaks. I don't remember what she said, but then I went up and I had my own placard. And so I took hers, which was resting against the podium, and I took it off and I threw it into the audience and the place went wild. So then I put my Reagan one there, and then I proceeded to argue why Reagan would be the best president from this point forward. And so, and he won that all school election. I don't remember the percentage, but I think he won pretty handily. Even though, as I said, Carter in the same part of Pennsylvania where I grew up, Central PA, Carter had won the previous in 76. But, so anyway, I those are some of my earliest memories. Of course, I ran for student government and just interested in politics. And then I studied poli-sci at West Point in the 80s when Reagan was president. And he came and visited while I was there and spoke to the Corps cadets. And we had so many different political figures coming through, speaking to us on, Henry Kissinger and, people like that on just the topics of the day, like the Cold War and the Soviet Union. And I remember I escorted Leslie Stahl from CBS around campus because she was speaking. She still was 60 Minutes all these years later, but she was speaking to us about the topic, our poli-sci section about the topic of the military and the media. And so she gave a good talk. And of course, she said some things and she recognized that it wasn't landing with that audience. And so she's like, oh, she would react every so often. I could see I'm getting on some touchy ground here. And so anyway, I had a lot of fun experiences like that. And then was in the Army. Then during the 90s, they had kind of a drawdown of forces. So I was in tanks. And so they said, we don't need nearly as many tank officers as we have. So you can go if you want. I was like, okay, I'll go. I went to law school with the thought of politics in mind at Regent University in Virginia Beach. And I interned summer on Capitol Hill, the summer of 95, actually, after the Republican Revolution, when they had taken back the House for the first time in 40 years. And Newt Gingrich was in charge. And it was, that was an exciting time. I saw him in the hallways sometimes. And Sonny Bono, the singer, was a member of Congress at that point. And so he was on my congressman was on the Judiciary Committee. And so since I was in law school, they would have me read testimonies and write little questions for the congressman to potentially ask. And Sonny Bono, he'd be there and he'd be saying, often he'd preface whatever he said with, I'm no lawyer, but, and then he'd go off into his spiel. And anyway, so then I worked on an attorney general race after law school and he won here in Pennsylvania. And then I got this idea to write this book, We Hold These Truths, that about the Declaration of Independence, which was based on a paper I wrote in law school about the theological underpinnings of the Declaration of Independence. So that was an academic paper, but the book is just a narrative looking at the Declaration's influence starting in the Revolution, Civil War, World War II, and then on to today. And I quote Charlie Kirk, pretty extensively in this 2026 edition. An 07 edition came out, that I wrote in the late 90s, early 2000s, but this was the 250th. So, and I should say I've worked on some U.S. Senate races as a press secretary and been on those news programs where you try to pitch your candidate.
Okay.
And so, but of course, the candidate's usually the one on most of the time. When there's something unpleasant to talk about, they put on the press secretary.
Yeah, exactly. And they don't want to show their face. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. So, as far as your book, I believe I'm correct in saying that you made the updated version of the book for the 250th anniversary, and you added Charlie in, or you had a lot more of his content in there. Tell me about that.
Yeah, well, I interviewed Charlie. I did the math, and I think he was about 20 when I interviewed him for the first time, because it was back at CPAC, maybe 2015, 2016. And he, when Turning Point was just getting going, he would go to CPAC with a huge number of people, supporters, and they would be manning his, swag, his tables in the exhibit hall, where Turning Point had a big presence, and they would have all kinds of swag and buttons and T-shirts and stuff like "Socialism sucks," "Big government sucks," so I would do these little Facebook lives with my phone with him, where he would talk about what they were up to that day. So I did a few of those a couple of the years with him. So that's how I originally met him, and then I interviewed him the last time, really in 2020, when a poll came out showing that socialism, that millennials, 7 in 10 millennials would be inclined, and they were the 20 somethings at that point. Now they're more the 30 somethings, but that 7 in 10 millennials would be open to voting for a socialist candidate. So it was already kind of swinging that way. Right. And so it was a great interview, and I include some of that in the book. And he talked about 2 questions he'd ask. I said, in talking to students, how do you find it effective to kind of dissuade them from socialism? And he said that I usually ask 2 questions, and it takes about 15 seconds. and he said one of them is, do you trust the government? And of course, this was, COVID was about to happen and all this stuff. And he said, usually the answer is no among younger people. Right. And I think in general, people kind of feel that way. And then he said, well, then why do you want to make it bigger? And then, well, I don't want to make it bigger. And so then maybe you're not a socialist then. So that's usually where he would go with his conversations. But, and then I live in Phoenix. I'm in Pennsylvania right now, where I grew up, staying with my mom here for a little bit. But in Phoenix, of course, I had access to all the different Turning Point events that they would have there pretty regularly. They would go to Dream City Church, which was a venue that seats a few thousand. And he'd bring in these big time speakers, or like they did a screening of a documentary they called Letter to the American Church. So he had Eric Metaxas in and James Lindsay and And then they had these 2, I don't even remember their names, a father and son apologists in one time, where they and they're famous, I know, but it just wasn't my thing. But they were, I just didn't know them by name. They did a very interesting talk that night, but they just went back and forth on the faith. People asked questions from the audience about it, and then Charlie was the moderator. So, and I went to the AmeriFest, pretty much every year, and I wasn't able to make it last year because it sold out too quickly. But so anyway, I got to see him a lot, and I would write articles, for the Western Journal, where I'm a contributor, and about the different events he was having in the area, AmeriFest and the others. And I'd send them to Charlie, and sometimes he'd shoot little messages back, oh, thank you, or, that sort of thing. But so those are the kind of last communications I have with him, say in 2024 and stuff like that. So he'd gotten so big and busy at that point. It was, the Western Journal is a great outlet, but I think he was focused on like Fox News and those sort of outlets. But
yeah, he was definitely going places. So what you said about socialism is really interesting and really important, those 2 questions. And we are going to get to that later on. But I want to go back to the book. So in the book, you talk about how freedom is impossible without virtue. right? Which is something that I believe wholeheartedly. But do you think America has reached a point where freedom has sort of eclipsed virtue, and our society is beginning to collapse now? Because now there's people who they don't have the virtue necessary, or I would say I think the majority of the public doesn't have the virtue necessary to maintain the freedoms, things like free speech, things like even maybe the Second Amendment, as we see with all these like school shootings. Like I'm very pro Second Amendment, don't get me wrong, but then I look at that and I'm like, well, we may have an actual problem because there are so many mentally ill people, there are so many non-virtuous people that they'll take guns and do bad things with them, or people use free speech to burn the American flag, right? So stuff like that. Do you think that our freedoms have eclipsed our virtues, and that's going to result in major societal chaos at some point in the future, like even more than we're seeing now, or maybe the complete downfall of American society? I know this is a huge question, but I would just love to get your thoughts on that.
Well, I guess I'll start with one of the nights I went. I think it was the night Eric Metaxas was there, actually, at Dream City Church. Charlie he made the point that, the reason we're struggling right now, that the Constitution maybe seems to some not able to deal with the different political forces going on, is that it was based on Christian virtues and Christian ideals. That was the underpinning, and it kind of assumed. And there's a quote he quoted John Adams to that effect: all moral and religious people, and it's inadequate for any. And Washington said the same in his farewell address, that don't think that public virtue is going to exist separate from religious morality. That what prompts people to kind of govern themselves is that they believe that they're accountable to a moral law. And and even the Declaration, referred to the laws of nature, which are the general moral laws that can be observed in life. And then the laws of nature's God, which are the specific ones in the Bible that are revealed, because, our reasoning can get off kilter. So I guess when you started to ask the question, the first thought that came to my mind, though, was 1968. And I think anyone living, probably, I was, barely a year old, but but in 1968, the country was in chaos. I mean, it was the drug culture, and it was the anti-war protests and race riots, and cities being burnt down. Like Martin Luther King shot, Robert Kennedy shot, and so anyone living then thought, "My gosh, this thing's going to fall apart if we keep going down." And even Robert Kennedy was saying that that we're in a very difficult time. But he also expressed the faith that we would get through it. Actually, when he spoke after the assassination of Martin Luther King in Indianapolis, he said words to that effect, that it was this very difficult time, but, to say a prayer for the country, and for, that God's mercy basically would be on it. And so I think, but at that same time, as the country seemed to be falling apart, and of course the Civil War is that on steroids, but at the same time, and there was this, I don't know if you've heard it, like this Jesus Revolution going on, that the movie Jesus Revolution was based on that. It was the Jesus movement, charismatic movement, all the renewal. There was all this Christian activity starting to take hold in California, in the California hippie culture, which was kind of the center of the anti-war protest and the drug culture and unvirtuous living, I guess you'd say. And yet, then, so renewal came to that community. Nobody knows the exact numbers, but probably by the millions. And it affected the whole society. And, those people went out and changed the culture too. I think I went to this church camp when I was growing up in the 70s, not far from here, maybe 20 miles. And I remember looking back, the songs that we were singing, and, by the campfire, and the leaders of some of the leaders of the camp outings we went on were these Jesus people. You could tell they're just kind of these hippie types that just were in love with God, and they just wanted to share it. And so that was a positive force. So I guess, no, I don't think we're too far gone. And of course, after Charlie's assassination, they were pointing out during the course of 2025, even before that there has been an uptick in interest in religion among Gen Z, and especially males, and but females too. And so that seems to indicate and Bible readership, Bible sales are up, massively, like 20-30% or something. And so it seems like there are indications that we're having that sort of faith renewal right now. And you see all these events on college campuses, with, hundreds and thousands, depending on the venue, showing up. So it seems like there's hope that the country will get back on track.
Yeah, for sure. I think I agree with everything. I think I agree with all of that. I think something that's I've definitely seen it, like, personally, just watching my church post Charlie's assassination. We haven't had, we live in a small town. There hasn't been like a huge influx of new people, but there's been, almost immediately right after his assassination, there were like 5 to 10 new people that started coming. And then that number just started to grow. And then we're getting more and more and more. And it's like, okay, something's happening. Clearly, it's not just, and I'm hearing this from all of my friends who are, saying people are coming back to church. They're, and there's stuff all over the news, of course, too, about this. They're coming back to church. They're joining Turning Point. They're getting involved in all these things. I know I have friends who are involved with Young America's Foundation. They've said the same thing.
Oh, yeah.
They've said there's huge influx of new students. They want to, they want to get involved in the movement, and even a lot of liberals. Like, I think the majority of it are kind of like conservatives who weren't super politically active before. But I've even seen stuff about liberals coming back and saying, okay, this is too much. It's time to start being serious about American ideals again and about Christianity and all these various things. So I think you're right. I think there is definitely some sort of a renewal going on, and I hope it lasts. I hope it doesn't just stop, because it's needed. It's needed very much.
Yeah, I noticed, I've been living away from Pennsylvania for over 15 years now, and the church that I used to attend, I've been attending again as I've been back in town for a few weeks. But I noticed, even as I look around that crowd, it's like, boy, I don't know, I want to say 20, 30, I think at least 30%, not 20, it's 30, maybe more percent are Gen Z. And I felt like maybe it was, I think it's up about 20%, I would kind of guess. So it's not half, but it's a large portion of the attendees, at least at the 11 o'clock service, is the younger crowd. And then if you go on a Wednesday night, where they have kind of a worship night with a little exhortation type thing, so it's not a full-on service, you even see, perhaps a higher percentage of the young people than that night. So.
Yeah, that's very cool. It's an encouraging sight. So while we're talking about post-Charlie, the conservative movement post-Charlie, what do you think is going to be the future of the conservative movement, especially with all of the infighting and divisions that happened after Charlie's death?
Yeah, it almost, I don't want to get too spiritual, but it almost seemed a little bit demonic in a way, that, so Candace Owens, who I interviewed once at CPAC, I can't say that, she was kind of just gaining a national platform at that point. And so maybe that was 2017, 2018. So she was just starting gaining prominence, but I did an interview with her, but she seemed to go off the rails as far as, like, she keeps throwing around these conspiracy theories and Israel and the military and, all this stuff about Charlie. And so, and then Tucker Carlson, I saw him at America Fest. I think this was the year before. I think it was probably 2024. Yeah, it was. And he gave, I think it was 2024, but he gave one of the best political speeches I'd ever heard in my life. He just laid it out. I don't even remember the subject, but he just was so clear, and he was so engaging in how he, went with the audience, explaining the current state of affair. I think he was probably making the case for Trump and why the left is crazy and all that stuff. And and I guess this would have been right after the 2024 election. So he was just very well received. And of course, he's gone, off on some of he's always been a little bit conspiratorial. And of course, they say the difference between a conspiracy and a fact is about 6 months, but and that is often true, but that's often true, but some things are just conspiracies. That's what the Bible says. Don't call everything a conspiracy that they say is a conspiracy. So I think it seems like the trend right now is that people are starting to more and more say, okay, they are maybe partly motivated by just money or followers or just saying and things that grab attention. So maybe take everything they say with a grain of salt. There is certainly a big divide in the party regarding, say, Iran or overseas wars. So I think that's there. It's tricky though, because what else do they want us to do? Iran was being a little bit quiet before Trump went in, but apparently they had the intelligence. We have to believe that they are certainly getting closer to nuclear weapons, and they're just weird enough and crazy enough to use them, and so we have to be aware of that. So yeah, I guess it seems like I kind of sense that the party's starting to come together, and that the midterms will not be a disaster. It's tough for the out of the party that does hold the White House during the midterms. There've just been a few times where that party has gained seats. I think 2002 was the most recent. With Bush after 9/11, and Clinton had it in 98, and there's just been a few. So the trend is usually that you lose some seats, but things have been so gerrymandered since then that may not play as big a role. And the Senate seems a little bit in the balance, but it's, the Republicans definitely have a shot to hold the Senate. And if they hold the Senate, they can do a lot of damage mitigation as to what the Democrats might want to do. Funding Democrats will demand more spending, unfortunately. But I think it seems like we're maybe going back. I think some of the craziest divisions, say last year or 6 months ago, seem to be kind of falling by the wayside.
Yeah, that's encouraging to hear for sure. I know I was just reading an article the other day. I read Daily Wire a lot, and I read an article the other day called, I'm gonna forget the name. I think it was called "Here Lie the Groypers," and it was kind of like half opinion, half reporting, and it was a Daily Wire reporter talking about the James Fishback campaign in Florida, right? And he was and he was talking about how when he actually went and talked to a lot of the voters, the people who supported James Fishback, and even James himself, he was stunned at how much it didn't really seem like they believed what they said. And his point was to kind of demonstrate that the whole super conspiratorial, super anti-war New Right phenomenon is significantly more an online thing than it is an actual in-person thing. And it doesn't actually matter to voters as much as issues like gas prices, grocery prices, national debt, all those sorts of things. Which is pretty interesting, because if it doesn't matter to voters, I mean, that's where the political power actually comes from, right? So the X comment threads can go wild all they want, and it doesn't matter. It's not going to change who's the president of the United States or who the governor of Florida is, right? So I'm definitely 100% with you on this. I don't support Tucker Carlson or Candace Owens anymore. I used to like them. Now I look at them and I go, okay, it's too much, too far. But I hope it's mainly just an online thing, which is, again, it's what I've heard, and I think it's probably generally true. But yeah, I guess only time will tell for sure.
Well, I was kind of covering for Western Journal the hearing with Tyler Robinson in Utah, and Erica had gone there, and so many of the conspiracies that Candace Owens was putting out there about Robinson not even being on campus, and this and that. The most recent one I wrote an article about, she said that the weapon that they say that he used is too powerful it would have caused more damage that we could see. I don't know about that. I mean, I grew up in Pennsylvania, and 30-06 is a popular deer hunting weapon. And it's not like I mean, I don't want to get into any graphic things, but I don't know, it doesn't destroy the animal or anything. It's not, I mean, it's kind of hard to talk about with relation to Charlie, but that's just her latest one. So, and she put out like 5 or 6 different ones, and the Israel one was just, I think that one's just from the pit and demonic origins or something. And then, because Israel, Charlie liked Israel. I was just at an event where Erica Kirk spoke in March, and she was affirming that, strongly. She's like, no, he loved Israel. He was planning to go back to Israel. We were going to go. And so that one can get tossed to the side. He was concerned about, I think it's legitimate that he was concerned about the U.S. getting in a ground war with Iran. And I think most everybody feels that way. Nobody wants another Middle East ground war. So, yeah.
Yeah, he was for sure. I listened to him say many times before he was killed, leading up to his death, that he was concerned about the Iran war. He didn't want to get into that. He didn't think bombing them was a good idea, because at that point, I think all that had been done was Trump had bombed the nuclear facilities. We hadn't got into the actual combat yet. But yeah, it got totally blown out of context. And it got blown out of context, especially like by Candace, who is not, if you listen to like what Andrew Colvett has said about her, and Blake Neff, I think his name is, the other guy who hosts the Charlie Kirk show, and others who actually worked with Charlie, they've said, no, she was removed from Turning Point USA, and it was done quietly, but it was not like, it was on good terms, but it was made very clear that, like, we don't want you to be a part. Charlie made it very clear that he did not want Candace to be a part of Turning Point. He didn't see her as a full ally because of things she had said. And I'm not sure exactly what it was that she said. This is just, stuff I've heard Andrew Colvett and Blake Neff talk about. So I'm thinking there's definitely a dynamic there of like, well, okay, she says she's his friend. She said she's his best friend in some cases. And she's claimed to know all this stuff about him, about how he was secretly, anti-Israel. But the people actually closest to him, his wife, his coworkers, his fellow executives, they say the exact opposite thing. So it's like, okay, who am I going to believe here? I mean, it's not that difficult, honestly, but I think it's captured a lot of people, especially online, who they're just not thinking, right? And I've talked to a lot of these people in comment threads. I've talked to them in person, because they'll see one of my videos where I'm trying to like break down what's going on and be like, no, these are actual legit conspiracy theories. They're totally made up, wholesale. And a lot of the time they've just never been exposed to somebody saying something else. All they're doing is listening to Candace, right? They've never listened to Ben Shapiro break it down, or Mark Levin, I know he's talked about it a little bit, him break it down. They've never listened to, Josh Carr. So any of these people who are in the media space trying to actually bring truth, they're just kind of isolated and in a bubble. And of course that creates a problem, because they're only getting one side of the story.
Well, they say conspiracies, when people can't understand an event that happens, they want to fill in the blanks. So JFK or Robert Kennedy or Martin Luther King, they pretty much know who killed Martin Luther King. There's still concerns, like Robert Kennedy Jr. doesn't feel like Sirhan killed his father, and or it wasn't. He was maybe a patsy, and that there was maybe another shooter there based on where the bullet entered. But so people are always trying to fill in the blanks, and there's a sense of like, maybe a sense of empowerment in some ways, where you feel like, I know what's really going on, because I've listened and I've decided that this is the right thing. And so that's just a little bit of part of human nature. The world can feel out of control at times. And so you're just looking for a sense of certainty, and somebody offers it like, oh, here's what really happened. Don't listen to the law enforcement in Utah, or, people talking, or even the text messages, or the Lance Twiggs guy, they're all just blowing smoke, the truth is this. I mean, that's what Candace is offering more than anybody. I don't know that Tucker's gotten into it as much, but I don't really if I catch a clip perhaps every now and again on X, but I haven't seen something from him too recently.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I will say I'm not like, I don't have an immediate allergic reaction to conspiracy theories, and I don't think people should, because we do need to find out the truth about things. And there are, like you said, the time between conspiracy theory and truth is usually like 6 months or whatever. I love that saying. Then that is the stuff, there is some truth to that, right? There are things like I would say, I did
COVID.
many podcast episodes on this a while ago with the JFK assassination. It's like, okay, there are questions. Like there's some weird stuff. I'm not saying that it wasn't Oswald, right? I don't know if it was or not, but I'm also saying like, okay, there is some stuff that needs to be looked at. But I'm not going to go as far as Candace's and be like, okay, I know who did it. It was Erica Kirk, or it was Israel, or like indicting a specific person. It's like, you don't really know that. You don't have proof. I think in most of these areas, the safest thing to do is to say, okay, we're looking at a situation, we're seeing problems with, say, the official narrative or whatever, and that's all we say. We don't go further than that. We just say, okay, there's problems, and we think there's more to the story. And then you can try to investigate, then you can try to do whatever, but the problem actually comes when they're like, oh, I know exactly who did it, or I know exactly who didn't do it, and they start accusing all of these people, and it's just, and then it turns into obviously a legal issue, because like Candace is getting sued for defamation. I'm sure others are going to be sued for defamation before long.
Good.
And it's like, okay, well, now you have a problem. Now you got to have a problem. And then I'm sure if those defamation suits go through at some point, she's going to be forced to take down some of the videos where she's made claims against people. And it just gets you into a big mess. It discredits you. It's not good. Not good. We should obviously seek truth, but not at the expense. There's always the temptation, especially I guess when you're big and famous like Candace is, to just put anything out there for money or for clicks or whatever. But that's something we obviously need to not succumb to.
No, I guess I would say, and of course Erica has spoken to this before, but I would say the theory that Turning Point did it is about the most ridiculous one, because there's no doubt that she loved him dearly, and the people around him. I was at I was in a multiple day event in March, which kind of gave a behind the scene look at Turning Point, and went to the headquarters and heard from all the leaders, and I met most of them, I guess. And the way they talked about September 10th or 9/10, it's almost like we talk about 9/11. There's just, you could feel the pain in their voices, who have been with Charlie, some of these people, since the very beginning. So there is no way anybody there wanted him to not be the leader that they loved him. They loved working for him. So that's just about the silliest of all the conspiracy theories.
Yeah, I agree. It absolutely is. So, socialism. This is kind of a big issue now, which is crazy. It's like we spent an entire century fighting socialism, and now it's back. So socialism is a massive issue for modern conservatives, especially with the recent rise in popularity of the DSA and people like AOC and Zoran Mamdani and Abdul El-Sayed, Hassan Piker, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Do you think there is a viable way for conservatives to fight socialism? Because the problem that I kind of see is that the socialists have they can promise the world to people, right? And people buy it. And that kind of gives conservatives a problem, because conservatives can't promise the world. They have a much harder message to swallow. So what are your thoughts on that? How do we fight socialism? And do you think we will eventually beat these groups like the DSA and, all these politicians?
Well, I wrote a whole documentary film about this. It's called I Want Your Money. It was in theaters in 2010. It was, and you can still see we made 3 original cartoons where Reagan was trying to teach Obama why big government or socialism doesn't work. And it had all the recent presidents in it, and Arnold Schwarzenegger and Nancy Pelosi, Hillary Clinton. So it was just we tried to take a little bit of a lighthearted look at it. But we did interview serious people from like Heritage and Cato and different organizations like that. And then Newt Gingrich and Andrew Breitbart. That was one of the fun interviews. And so we made California a case study in the movie. And we said, look at California. It's got the most expensive. They've done more with growing the size of government than any other state. If you're not willing to look at Latin America, or for those of us, Gen X and whatever later, the Europe, when with the Cold War, just as a reminder, the Soviet Union, it was short for the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. so it was all based on government-controlled socialism. And the same with these Latin American countries who are all moving away from it. And even, everybody likes to throw out their Scandinavia, but look at Sweden, or look at Norway. And they, like Sweden, has taken major steps to move in the other direction in recent years. And Sweden and some of these other countries, one thing that they recognize is that you don't kill the goose that lays the golden egg. So they've had very pro-business tax environments. And so the way people pay for these generous welfare benefits that people associate with socialism is that they're taxed a lot more. Like in the United States, people in the bottom 50% of wage earners pay about 3% of the total of all federal revenue each year, because there's, child tax credits. There's the standard deduction, which is $13,000 or $14,000. So any money you earn up to that point isn't even subject to federal income tax. And then if you're a couple, you double that amount. And so there's all these different ways that families starting out don't pay federal income tax at a very bare minimum. And what they've done in Europe, and if this is what we want to do, is they have a VAT tax, a value-added tax, which is basically a sales tax nationally. So all the products that are made and bought, they put a tax in as it's being manufactured. And so you pay a higher price for stuff. And that's how they fund these welfare programs. And, Great Britain, and maybe Sweden does it well. I haven't read too much about that, but Great Britain and Canada are two examples of what you would call Medicare for all. And the wait times and the level of care is so much less than the U.S. People from Canada come to America and Great Britain when they need something, and they need it in a timely fashion. They're willing to, if they've got the means, they're willing to pay money to come here and get it done, because the state-run medical systems are so slow, and it's not based on customer service, you might say, at any level. It's just based on, like when you go to get your driver's license, it's people do their job, and a lot of times it's done in a decent way. I mean, there's no incentive to do things necessarily better unless you happen to have certain supervisors or something that create capitalistic type incentives, like reward people who do their jobs very well. But for the most part, like Charlie was saying, government, it serves necessary purposes, but it's not a good arbiter of how resources should be allocated in an economy. Like there's in my documentary film, which is called "I Want Your Money," we had a clip from Milton Friedman that's been shown for years, but he was in his back and forth with Phil Donahue, who was a popular talk show host in the 70s and 80s. He was a little bit of a bomb thrower, very liberal, but he asked Milton Friedman, who was a Nobel Prize winning economist, he said, "Don't you think greed isn't there a better way to organize a society and an economy than by greed?" And Friedman responded, and he said, "What country do you know doesn't run by greed? Do you think that the Soviet or the communist commissar doesn't run by greed? Do you think, Stalin didn't run by greed?" Societies, he said, are organized by people pursuing their own interests. And so in the case of socialism, it's the government leaders who have their own interests, and they accumulate wealth and privilege. They take it away from the business class, which is, at least that's merit-based to a large measure. People have ideas and they go out and build businesses. You can say, well, some families, you inherit the business, and then it's up to the next generation to keep the business going. So even then it's merit based. So yeah, Milton Friedman ended that interchange saying the societies where the most number of people have experienced the most well-being and having the things that they need in life are the capitalist societies, the free market societies, where people can go out and earn their living. And the ones that have the least wealth or whatever are like Reagan called it, shared scarcity when he was running for president, are these ones with the top-down controlled economy. It's like Animal Farm, Orwell's Animal Farm, where it starts out the pigs get rid, all the animals get rid of the humans who are to be like the business leaders or the capitalists. And then eventually, the pigs take control. And of course, he's choosing pigs because there's an image there. But, ultimately, and they keep adding more and more privilege to themselves and separating themselves. The original rule is that all animals are equal. And then at the end of the book, it's like all animals equal, but some animals are more equal than others. So that's what the pigs have become. They were more equal than others. So, yeah. So that's what it is. In AOC's world, in Bernie Sanders' world, he used to say millionaires, and then he became a millionaire. And he's like, billionaires. We shouldn't have billionaires. And we shouldn't have, and of course, Elon Musk, we shouldn't have a trillionaire. And it's like, well, Elon Musk employs through his companies 160,000 people directly. And who knows how many tens of thousands of more, because companies supply his companies with things that they need to make the products that they make, like Teslas and whatever else, SpaceX. And so I don't know, it's a lesson that we've had to keep relearning, that socialism was kind of popular in the 1910s. It was gaining some foothold. And then in the 1930s with the Great Depression, and FDR made some moves that way. And I don't fault him too much, given everything that was going on in the world. You had fascism and communism on the ascendance. And so he moved the U.S. a little that way, a lot, some would say, but capitalism was at least kept in place, and we could launch, we could grow again after World War II. So I don't know, I guess you just have to keep making the arguments again and show the clips of it's unfortunate, but so far we haven't had to learn the lesson firsthand. The U.S. hasn't had to. We've been able to kind of push back against the forces that want to make the government control all. The government has grown over the years, but it's never overtaken the capitalist system, the free market system.
Yeah, for sure. There's like I mentioned earlier, it's not just with the conspiracy thing. There's also that bubble with socialists who kind of, I guess, they go to public school, they get taught socialism is the thing, America is bad, and they don't really know anything else. So, like, I saw a short on YouTube the other day that was just fantastic. It's like one of the best I've ever seen. A guy is selling T-shirts on a street in New York, and an interviewer walks up to him and he's like, are you a socialist? Like, do you agree with socialism, right? And it's just a guy running a T-shirt stand. The guy's like, yeah, I'm generally favorable to socialism. I don't really like capitalism. He's like, well, how much are you selling these T-shirts for? And the guy's like, $20, and or $40, and the guy's like, the interviewer is like, well, how would you like it if the government came in and told you that you had to sell these for $20, not $40, and you couldn't make a profit? He's like, well, I wouldn't like that. Obviously, that'd be horrible. And the interviewer just kind of stares at him for a minute, and then explains to him, like, that is socialism. And the guy had no idea. And he was like, oh, he just thought it was, he's just a Democrat, right? And this is just the direction the party is going. This is just the cool thing to do. This is, what all the young, hip Democrats are doing, the Zoran Mamdanis of the world and the AOCs of the world. And so I think education is a huge factor in it. It's, we don't necessarily have to fight them. We have to do what Charlie did. We have to walk onto, college campuses and tell them, in an activist way, we have to walk onto college campuses and places and, like, educate them on what socialism actually is. And then in an institutional way, we have to have, I know Charlie talked about this in his book, Right Wing Revolution. We have to actually have Republican leaders, conservative leaders, who are willing to take control of education departments and things and fire Marxist professors and Marxist board members and replace them with, fair, evenly balanced people who are going to just tell people the truth about history and about America and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, I think education is definitely the key.
We have one of the cartoons in the documentary film I wrote is that Reagan gets in front of a classroom and Reagan steps aside and lets Obama propose. Obama's one of the students, and he proposes that all this. I think it would be fair. And Reagan steps aside and lets him take the podium, and he's like, "I think it would. I think I speak for the whole class, where I think we want to go ahead and have whatever our grades be, whatever the averages of all the students in the classroom." And so Reagan says, "Well, okay, we can do that," because he knows how it's going to work out. It's from the cartoons, and so like George Bush who wasn't known for particularly having good grades in college, he turns to Clinton or somebody and says something like, "Oh, this is great. I'm gonna text my friend Karl, Karl Rove, that he doesn't have to send the answers over anymore." And so
that's awesome.
Anyway, it's just a bunch of little silly things like that. And so the message of the cartoon is that first, so the first test that came through, the students did okay. They all got B's or B minuses or something when they averaged it all together. But then the students who had done well and really exerted themselves realized it didn't matter. And so they stopped applying themselves. And the ones that were not particularly good did even less. And so that by the end, the grades had come all the way down to failing pretty much. So that, in a sense, is what socialism is, that, okay, we're going to even everything off, that, nobody should be making, millions of dollars or whatever. And, that way we'll make the society more equal and that sort of thing. But the problem with that is that, then, of course, Reagan even used this as an illustration. In the 1950s, he was an actor. And so the top tax rate was 90%. So you could earn up to a certain amount at, say, a 30% rate. And then when you got, of course, in today's dollars, but say back then it was when you got above, say, 60,000 or 70,000, then it went up to, I'm just putting numbers out there, but it eventually went up to 90%, so that anything you earned, say, above 150,000 was taxed at 90%. So, and in today's dollars, say that would be several $100,000. That you'd get to earn, and then it at a graduated amount. So they're taking first 60 and then 70 and then finally 90%. And so he said, once you hit that 90%, you didn't want to work the rest of the year, because it's like, why give the government 90% of what you earn? So that was kind of an FDR era policy. That was certainly not the 1920s when the Republicans were in charge. And there was a recession that quickly ended because they cut taxes instead of increased the size of government. But that's another story. But so that was kind of a holdover. And so they started to have some tax cuts under Ike. And then Kennedy is famously supported tax cuts. And that was a big across the board for businesses and individuals. And by the end of the 60s, we were in surplus again because the economy had grown so much. But yeah, that's the mechanism they use.
Yeah. Yeah, capitalism works. You have to have that incentive structure for sure. So the other, I guess, big threat facing America today is Islam. We see this in, there's places like Dearborn, Michigan, where I guess Muslims have taken over. When I say Muslim, I'm not referring specifically to the religion. I'm talking more about the extremely radical side of it. That are actually trying to come in and, take control of the government, take control of these various places like in Michigan. What do you think is the solution to, radical Islamists coming in and trying to take political power? And more than, I guess, obviously the obvious solution is, well, get rid of them, just deport them or something. And, that's a discussion we can have. But I think there's kind of an unwillingness, at least that I see in the Trump administration, to actually do anything about that. They're kind of like, oh, we'll take funds away from Michigan or any of these places, or like New York with Zohran Mamdani in charge. or we will, inflict minor political punishments on them, but we're not actually going to like go far enough to get rid of them, right? Which is something I disagree with. I think, no, if you're preaching anti-Americanism, I think you should just be deported. But I'm curious, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think what is the solution to just Islam in the United States, radical Islam in the United States?
Well, radical Islam for sure. I notice Phoenix is one of the communities where refugees are relocated. So we see a decent number of Muslim people there. And I see them, they seem to gather in one of the local parks, pretty regularly. Like they seem to have like their Sunday night rituals and have cookouts and whatever. So that all seems innocent enough. People are just, they've left some tumultuous situation and they're trying to build a new life in America. So on the one hand, I like, and of course you want people of different faiths and backgrounds to come, because that's the whole point of Christianity, is we're trying to reach the world. And if the world's going to come in a sense to us, then that's all the better. I do recognize, certainly anybody who's here on a student visa or any sort of temporary thing, if they're saying, like Marco Rubio is so good on this point, if you're saying things and subversive things and you're not an American citizen, you're here on a visa or even some sort of green card, I guess, in a sense, they should all be subject to deportation. Anyone who speaks like that, but we are, the Constitution does allow for freedom of religion. So and there are obviously wonderful Muslim people who serve in the military and police officers, do good things. So I would hate to use a big brush to say people who adhere to that faith are, bad people, because they're just trying to make their way in life as we all do. But yeah, anyone, obviously if an American citizen, there is a First Amendment right, so they can say certain things, but you can't yell fire in a theater, or you can't advocate people to take immediate violence against the government or against people, or so any of those things, they should be criminally prosecuted. But I don't think we either legally or we would want to just deport just Muslim people en masse. So yeah, it's something to consider. Like Trump even put in place certain restrictions for people wanting to immigrate from the country from hostile nations, that they get like much higher level of scrutiny or even be denied access in the first place. So I think that's all legitimate. If we can't prove kind of their background at all, we don't want to invite terrorists into the country. So I think I'm taking kind of a middle ground. Like I want to give people the benefit of the doubt that we're all on this spiritual journey of sorts, and bringing Muslim people to America might be a chance for them to get exposed to the gospel. But yeah, if they come from kind of a questionable background, or if they advocate violence, or even some of these students like in New York that were doing these protests against Israel and scaring Jewish people to death. They're on student visas. They need to go. so Marco, like I said, Marco Rubio was good about that. It's like, you're our guests here and you're trying to stir people up against American citizens. Goodbye. We don't care. We don't need you in our colleges. We don't need you on our streets.
Yeah, for sure. I guess the standard shouldn't be Muslims. The standard should be, are you anti-American, and not anti-American in the sense that you're actually actively like seeking to subvert the safety of the American people, right? Because that's not just Islam. There are there are socialists that are doing that. There are other terrorist groups, cartel organizations, that are trying to do all that. So I guess the standard isn't really Islam. You're right in that, because it's just a religion. The standard is, are you using your freedoms that you have in America, things like free speech and the right to keep and bear arms and, all those various things, to subvert the safety of the American people? That's kind of where I draw the line. That's where I say, well, if you get up in a Dearborn, if an imam in Dearborn gets up and says, death to America and, all Christians and Westerners need to die. Well, okay, that's a problem. Like I don't have any I don't have any problem with the imam, saying Islam is great and preaching about Islam, but I do have a problem with him saying that American citizens need to die, or that, advocating actual violence, right? Because I think that's another way also we combat the spread of political violence,
Sure.
which is a real problem. You need to crack down on it. Like there needs to not be, there's a big, social media response. No, we need to see an actual response from the government. So when somebody says something like, people said things after Charlie Kirk's assassination, like he should have died, or they feel sorry for the bullet, and more disgusting things that I'm not going to go into here. They said stuff like that. Well, the government needs to start just taking them at their word and being like, okay, you say that, we believe you. Now we're going to act on that, and we're going to start watching you and seeing, are you somebody who's actually going to commit political violence or whatever, right? So I think maybe that's a potential solution, but those are my thoughts.
No, yeah, I think that's legit. I mean, that's the FBI's job and others. If people are gathering people and they seem to be involved with subversive activity, then monitor them, the speeches that they make, and when they cross the line into conspiracy to commit violence or that sort of thing, then they can be prosecuted. But American citizens can't just be deported. That's not what we want. I know that there's they've looked at the idea of they've looked at the idea that can a naturalized citizen lose his naturalization depending on how far that person goes, like, in going against the country. There might be something there. But, because I think, of course, to become a naturalized citizen, you have to pledge an allegiance to the Constitution and the ideals of the country and that sort of thing. So if they're going against what they pledged, there might be some legal room there. But again, that would be for the extreme cases of people trying to push violence or that sort of thing.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I would agree with that. I don't think we should be wantonly deporting American citizens. Obviously, that would be like an insane situation. American citizens, they have certain rights. They should obviously be kept within the American justice system, but stuff like, naturalized citizens or people who are here illegally, which I think there are a lot of still, even after the deportations, all the ICE stuff. I think there's still a lot of people here. So just stuff like that. They can all go. Yeah, exactly. They shouldn't even be here in the first place.
Yeah, they can all go.
It doesn't matter if you're preaching violence or not. You just leave. Yeah. So
I think they can all go.
Yeah, for sure. So we'll wrap up with this, I guess. What are your thoughts? I'll just ask, just for the sake of time, what are your predictions? Obviously, all of this taken with a grain of salt because we don't know what will happen. But for the 2026 midterms this year, and then 2028, what do you think is going to happen? Do you think we're going to keep control? The conservatives are going to keep control? Or do you think there's going to be a resurgence in Democrat power?
It might work to our benefit in the way that it has in the past, that the Democrats take back the House. I mean, in the long scheme of things, like looking towards 2028, it's likely that they should be able to take back the House, but I think the Republicans will likely control the Senate. History would say that the Democrats will take back the House, but as I said, they've done so much gerrymandering over the year. 2022 should have been a Republican year, U.S. year, but and it barely was. And I think that's because they've done so much to change the congressional maps. So they thwarted the red wave like we saw in 2010. And because I think they've worked hard at it for the last 10, 15 years. But say the Democrats take the House, then they'll try to do some crazy things. They won't be able to help themselves. That's what they do with power. And they'll probably try to impeach Trump again. And I think that actually might work towards a Rubio or a Vance candidacy. It's like, oh, here they go again. It will remind people how crazy the Democrats can be. And then help the Republican in 2028. But I mean, in my ideal world, I'd like the Republicans to hold both, but the House seems it's so close. I don't, the Democrats, they will really have to blow it if they don't get the House, but it's possible. And then, for the 2028, I think Republican side, I like Rubio. I even liked him in 2016, but I really recognized then that he was young and needed more experience. So I'm glad he's been Secretary of State and gained some more, worldwide experience. And Vance, he's not as charismatic, not as whatever. Obviously, I'd vote for him easily over any Democrat they'll put up, but I'm not as excited about him as Rubio. And then on the Democrat side, it's hard to say. Like, if they do kind of go crazy and get the House, and that might encourage them, and so they'll put. I can't see that AOC would be the nominee unless it's a situation in 2016 where there's so many candidates that Trump, say, was able to win in 2016 because the establishment divided themselves off. So the Democrats, it seems like they should be able to put up somebody that's a little more center than AOC, and she would maybe would be the vice presidential person, or she may just run for Senate. But it's hard to say on the, Newsom, of course, is going to try, and he's pretty slick. He's got a little bit of a Bill Clinton thing going on. So, and Bill Clinton was able to sweet talk his way into the White House, but so Newsom might come around enough to get there. But then I don't think any of these some of the senators will run and maybe they'll gain traction. Probably they won't. Like Mark Kelly will probably try to run if he can gain any traction. And then I don't think any of these people like Bashir or Shapiro, who are a little more normal, will probably gain enough traction to become the nominee. I don't see that happening.
Yeah, it seems like they're kind of caught between a rock and a hard place. You have to be super radical to satisfy the party elite, but you also have to be moderate to satisfy the actual voters across the country. And that's kind of the trap that they're caught in. It's like, okay, which way do I go? And you got people like John Ossoff or Josh Shapiro who are more more moderate, and they're trying to appeal to the voters, but then the party elite don't like them very much. Like I know Josh Shapiro has already started to be disowned by some people. And then you've got people like AOC, which are who are super radical, but they can't, there's not a chance in the world that they'll be, they'll perform great in New York, but there's not a chance in the world that they'll get any voters in the Bible Belt. They're just too radical, even for a lot of moderate Democrats, right? So they kind of have a tough position there. They dug themselves into a hole.
And it's happened before. In 72, Nixon ran for re-election and he won 49 states. As I recall, it was like Reagan's 84 landslide. It's because he was just way off into the left-wing politics. And he was a World War II veteran, hero, good guy in some ways. I didn't know him, but from what I know of him, but his policies were so far left, the country, just entirely rejected him. Now there's more blue states now, but like you said, AOC might win 8 or 10 states or something, but.
Yeah, for sure. Well, 2028 is the first election where I'm old enough to vote. And so I'm very hopeful that things are going to turn out well. And yeah, we'll see what happens. But Randy, thank you so much for being here. This has been a very interesting conversation, and I would definitely love to have you on again at some point in the future, and we can talk about more interesting stuff.
No, that sounds good. Can I plug my book again?
Sure. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, and also I'll plug your book for you before you do it too. It is an awesome book. I've started reading it, and I love it so far. So anybody watching this, definitely go check it out. Randy will tell you more about it in a second. But also the documentary, tell us about the documentary too, because I want to, where can I watch that? I would love to watch that too. That sounds super interesting.
Well, I think you can Google "I Want Your Money" on YouTube, and you can see the trailer, and you can see the 3 original cartoons in it, and you can probably see a hacked or a pirated version of the whole thing. If that's the last time I checked, it was still there, because I don't know what happened, but it used to be streaming on. I guess that these things have like a shelf life, and so it used to stream on Netflix and I think Amazon Prime too. You could purchase it that way, but I'm not sure because I just wrote it, but and I was an assistant producer. But the owner of the film, I don't know if I guess he'd have to enter in a new contract or something to get it streaming again. So you can still purchase DVDs, or you can watch a pirated version on YouTube. I hate to say that, but and assuming it's still there, but it's so it's a little grainy on YouTube. Unfortunately, it's not as crisp as it would be if it were streaming somewhere. But yeah, it's the message is still good, and the cartoons are of course high def, and they still look great, and so you can at least get a flavor for that. And the trailer kind of shows you some of the different people that we talked to in the movie. And the trailer, when it came out originally, was the most viewed political trailer of a documentary, political documentary trailer of any in the history. They took that one down and put up a new one that promoted the DVD, and that got an additional 1 million. So the original got like 4 million, which was, YouTube was still pretty young back then. So this was 2010. So, but now it's millions is more common, but yeah, the book this just came out in hardback too. So there's a soft, paperback and then hardcover, but basically the premise of it is that leaders throughout American history have appealed to this belief in God-given rights and divine providence. And so it's a narrative. Like I just go from the Revolutionary War, Civil War, World War II, and I start with like Patrick Henry's "Give Me Liberty" or "Give Me Death" speech. And so he kind of introduces you to what started the Revolutionary War. And then I take it. Washington, of course, is a big part of the starring, and Jefferson and Franklin, and then the Civil War, Frederick Douglass. Each of the three sections, Revolution, Civil War, World War II, has a cultural leader. So, and I argue that Charlie Kirk is like one of these cultural leaders in our time. But, so you had Thomas Paine gets a chapter, and then Frederick Douglass. Julie Ward Howe is in there. She has a section, and then she wrote the Battle Hymn of the Republic. And then Frank Capra, who was a famous film director, It's a Wonderful Life, and Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. But he was in the Army during World War II, and he wrote documentary films called Why We Fight. And so one of them won an Academy Award in 1942 for Best Documentary. But so, and then then I go on to today and I examine where we are and then what we can do to kind of flourish in the years ahead. But I do argue that the reason the United States was the land of the free and the home of the brave is because of the belief in God-given rights and divine providence that these leaders kept coming back to. So I think it's an inspiring tale. It's on audiobooks now too, on most platforms. Audible seems to be taking a long time. I don't know what the deal is there, but it's on, Google Play and Hoopla and Apple and Barnes and Noble, a lot of different platforms. But I would love to get it on Audible because I have some credits there that I could use and listen to my own book that way. But
yeah, very
and
cool.
John Pruden did the narrative. John Pruden is the narrator, and he did American Sniper and The Crusader about Ronald Reagan. He's done some big time books, DeSantis book, and he's the real deal. So I've listened to some of it. It's good. He's an Army veteran too, so there's a lot of war stuff in my book. So I was happy to have someone with that background.
Okay, that's very cool. It is, like I said, I haven't gotten all the way through it yet, but it is well worth the read. So anybody watching this, make sure to go pick up a copy of that book. I will also put a link to it down in the description and down in the comments in a pinned comment. So you can just go down there, click it, and check it out. Definitely purchase a copy, and also check out the documentary, I Want Your Money. You can get the pirated version on YouTube, or maybe the other version other places. But anyway, thank you so much, Randy, for being here.
I hope I don't get in trouble for saying that.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you, Carson.
Yeah.
Thank you. I enjoyed it. Thank you.